later today in appropriations, hopefully in the next hour or so, we're going to amend one of the supplemental bills that the House sent us last month with the remaining, was it 13% or so of the budget that the governor blue lined for the final. He had another attempt to try to bring the 15-16 spending plan to a closure. We're going to add yet more money to basic education, another $50 million, which will give us a total, if you add the accountability block grant, of $200 million new dollars to basic ed, to try to reach out to the governor and say we're trying to meet some of his goals. This would close out the 15-16 budget. A lot of things aren't in it that we would like pension reform is not there, but it's March. Schools are running out of money. Penn State's ag extension, which goes across the state, talking about laying off over 1,000 workers. This budget would take care of all that. We'd restore the agriculture cuts, we'd restore the hospital cuts, we would restore, new money for education. So, we think yet again we're trying to get this completed and then immediately pick up the 16-17 budget. We need to pick that up right away. Hopefully get that done before June this time. But we need to close out 15-16 before we can take up 16-17. And so we're going to run this appropriations today, pass it on the floor tomorrow, should get it to the House in fashion that they can take it up tomorrow. So, obviously this has been a difficult year, and I think it's time to get the schools funded. And not only are we funding them, we're adding $200 million to the schools, which I think is a pretty significant investment into public education. Let me turn it over to Dave.
Yeah, when the Senate sends it over to us tomorrow, we plan on staying for and voting on concurrence. We will also reconsider the votes on the state-related universities, the non-preferred appropriations. As Jake had mentioned, in totality, we got a $200 million increase in basic education. You've got significant increases in special education and early childhood education, and a 5% increase in higher education. We understand this budget doesn't reflect everything that everybody wants. We'd love to do pension reform. We'd love to do liquor reform. A lot of folks want to do property tax reform. Obviously, the governor would like to do some things too, but we are 3/4 of the way into the fiscal year. The time is of the essence to close out 15-16, make sure school districts have their money and are not in danger of closing, make sure our university students across the state and our extension offices do not have to lay off folks and can continue into the school year, and then immediately get into the negotiations for 16-17, which I think in fairness, a lot of the work has been done. We still have some tough decisions to make to close out the structural deficit that is in existence for 16-17, but I think we're committed to trying to do that before the June 30th deadline and hopefully get 16-17 done early.
To be clear, you're just taking the budget you passed in December, taking the blue lines and reinstating
We are accepting some of the blue lines. We are reducing the spend from what we passed in December. This is about just a little over $30 billion. And so, because we're not adding revenue to this pot, there'll be no new taxes, no new increases of any kind. So we're reducing the spend. We accept some of the blue lines. We recalculate some of the entitlement spending to the caseload that we think are updated to today's projections.
So you're either taking the lines that were blue line as is or reducing the spend on it.
Correct. We reduce the spend almost $300 million or $250 million, something of that nature from what. Well, again, there's a variety of things. You'll get to see the tracking runs, but obviously the governor blue line some things. We accepted some of those, but we were able to reduce the spend down to a point where we won't need any new revenue, which is important. I know it's important to your caucus, important to our caucus, and it's closes out 15-16 with, again, a significant new increase in basic education. So I would think that the school districts would really appreciate the governor sign this.
But you're not increasing any lines that were blue lined in December.
No, we are. Basic education.
Basic education. That's
the
only one.
The same increase.
That's the only one.
That's the same increase that you had in
No,
December.
No, it's not.
We had 50 more million.
How is the basic education money going to be distributed?
We'll be running a fiscal code as well out of rules today and on the floor tomorrow, then to the House. We are embracing the funding commission, the Fair Funding Commission that was chaired by Senator Brown. That formula would be the formula that we will put in the fiscal code to send to the governor to drive out the money.
In previous budgets, the governor has said, Democrats have said, the math isn't right. Is the math right?
Yeah, the math is absolutely right. We've reduced expenditures by a couple $100 million, mostly, as Senator Corman referenced, in a recalculation of some of the Medicaid expenditures, just because we know the actual caseload now, 3/4 of the year in, as opposed to in December, where you're kind of guesstimating the second half of the fiscal year. The FIA board has some additional earnings that they're able to supplement the FIA appropriation, and some of the items, some of the smaller line items, instead of doing 2 or 3% increases, we just let them at level funded on the 14-15 numbers to bring it into balance with the $200 million worth of lapsed funding that the governor's budget address had indicated was available for this year. It balances, and actually will finish with about a $15-20 million surplus going into the next fiscal year.
This plan is not the result of agreement with Governor Wolf or with legislative Democrats, is it?
No, it is not. We reached out to the governor last week, or at least the governor's office, told him of our plans to move forward. We haven't gotten any suggestions as of today. We've had I talked to the governor today. Again, we're having some discussions, but at this point it is not. And we're going to move ahead.
Do you anticipate having the votes to override a veto?
Look, that's the next step. I hope the governor signs it. Look, it's March, for goodness sakes, and we could focus on what this budget isn't, but I think we ought to focus on what it is. When schools are, one here in Dauphin County, from what I understand, are a week or so away from not being able to meet payroll. It's time for we're giving up on pension reform for this year. That was our number one issue. They've given up on liquor reform for this year. There's some big issues in front of us. Tax, as you mentioned, property tax reform. All these we still want to get in part of the 16-17 budget. We're not going to get it in for the 15-16 budget, and it's not fair to have the schools looking at the troubles that they're going to be in without any new revenue or without this budget. So. Let's get it done. Let's get the schools funded so we take them out of harm's way, and then we begin to discuss these big issues in 16-17 immediately.
Are you guys optimistic that the governor will eventually sign this, or?
I have to ask him.
Are you done with medical marijuana now?
No, we're still voting. I'm on leave from the floor, so I'll go back and continue voting shortly.
Based on what you've seen, do you think that this bill coming out of the House is going to pass the Senate?
I haven't seen it. We're focused on the budget, but it's very close. If there's some minor changes we might have to make, but that'll be a next week project.
Leader Reed, on the state-related, if you plan to run that again to fund the state-related schools, why do you think Democrats will stop blocking it?
Look, that's a decision that they're going to have to make. I personally have had a considerable amount of conversations with House Democrats, both rank and file and leadership, and I do believe the dynamic is a little bit different sitting here towards the latter end of March than it was in January. In January, you're still looking at the whole second semester of the school year, and the state-related universities were in a little bit different situation. Now that you're almost a month and a half away from the end of the school year, if they don't get these appropriations, thousands of people are going to be laid off across the state. Education for our young people is going to be in jeopardy. So hopefully, and I know the state-related universities have had a lot of conversations with Republicans and Democrats as well.
Why not stop this merry-go-round of passing something that is not an agreed-to plan, having it vetoed or thrown back to you, and actually sit down with the governor and work out something?
We have tried to talk to the governor. Right now, you're at the point in the fiscal year where there's only one tax that you could increase to actually get revenue because of the implementation dates and how long it makes to make those tax changes, and that's a retroactive personal income tax. That's the only tax you can get revenue from this year, and I've talked to my members. There's not a single member of my caucus that's for it. I've talked to a lot of House Democrats. They're not for it either. So this is the revenue available. This allows us to keep school districts open, and we want to talk to the governor immediately so that we're not in the same situation in 16-17. But at some point, you got to be realistic as to what's possible and what's not possible this year.
So are you saying that he basically rebuffed this when you tried to make this overture to him?
Look,
or did you guys just tell him?
I don't want to speak for him. We reached out to the administration last week, told them of our plans. They said they'd get back to us this week. We've had some conversations this week. They certainly have not embraced it, but I'll let them describe their own opinions on it. But again, we are days, if not weeks, if not days away from some schools running out of money, not being able to make payroll. Whether they can keep the schools open or not, I don't know. But if I'm that person that's not getting paid, that's problems I'm going to have, whether it be a school teacher or administrator. We need to get this done. This isn't perfect, but it is significant. It's a significant investment. It's an education. It's a 5% increase. We restore the state system funding. It's a 5% increase for higher education. It's $200 million new dollars for basic education. So this is significant. And I would say to the governor, all right, just close it out. We finish 15-16, sign this, and we'll take up 16-17 immediately. I cannot think of a reason not to sign this bill. So we're going to get it to him tomorrow before the schools run out of money, and hopefully he'll sign it, and we can begin the process of getting back to some of those big issues like property tax reform and pension.
Have you given the governor any assurances on how you'll deal with the deficit in 16, 17?
No, I mean, we're going to work together on it, obviously. I'm sure we'll have some of the same discussions we've had for some time. We acknowledge that there's going to be challenges in the 16-17 budget, and we'll work through them together.
But you haven't committed to the kind
I
of
mean, we
tax
haven't committed to anything.
But
The new money distribution for education, is it just the 50 million now that you're adding that would be distributed based on what you've done in the fiscal?
It'd be the additional dollars, the $150 million above last year's amount in the basic education line item, and then you've got the $50 million in the Ready to Learn block grant. Each school district would receive the same amount of money they received last year out of the first half of the appropriation, and then the new money would be distributed through the Basic Ed Funding Commission proposal. And look, when we look at next year's budget, the key to balancing 16-17 is identifying the structural deficit and closing that first. You can't add, $1 billion, $2 billion, $2.5 billion of new spending on top of a structural deficit when you're trying to get, expenditures in line with revenues. We want to close the structural deficit, make some targeted investments in education, and then get our books back in order. You can't increase spending everywhere else by 5, 10, 15% and call it a structural deficit.
the plan for this bill is final passage from the Senate tomorrow and the concurrence tomorrow in the House.
Correct.
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 All right.
Okay.
Just the
Thank
school
you.